Rachel Maddow sat at the MSNBC desk, leaning forward with that familiar intensity, ready to dismantle her guest. The night segment had been building up all week, teased in promos as a critical conversation on integrity and accountability. The guest was none other than Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, known for her sharp wit and unshakable presence on live television. From the opening moments, Maddow's tone was electric with frustration. She recited headlines, waved papers, and accused Crockett of twisting the narrative around recent political hearings. Her voice rose with every sentence until it became less of an interview and more of a verbal barrage. Maddow's words echoed through the studio, her frustration visible as she jabbed her finger toward the camera. Viewers could practically feel the tension vibrating through the screen. But Crockett didn't flinch. She waited, calm and poised, until Maddow finally paused for air. Then, with a subtle smile, she leaned into the microphone and delivered a single line that cut through the noise like a blade. "Rachel, the difference between shouting and proving is evidence. And I came with plenty." The room fell silent. The statement was sharp, but the way she said it, measured, clear, and unbothered, turned the tide instantly. Maddow tried to interrupt again, but Crockett was ready. She pulled out printed reports, referenced timelines, and laid out her points with surgical precision. Every claim Maddow had shouted was calmly dismantled. The more Crockett spoke, the more it became clear who was in control of the exchange. The audience watching at home began lighting up social media with clips of her responses. Then came the moment that went viral. Maddow, visibly agitated, snapped, "This isn't about you winning some argument." Crockett leaned back, gave a short laugh, and replied, "If facts sound like winning, maybe you should ask why shouting sounds like losing." That single line set the internet ablaze. Within minutes, the clip was being shared everywhere, on Twitter, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and political forums. People replayed it, quoting it, turning it into memes, and hailing it as one of the most iconic clapbacks in recent TV history. By the time the segment wrapped, it wasn't Maddow who appeared to dominate the stage. It was Crockett, calm, articulate, and entirely unfazed. As the cameras cut to commercial, Maddow's frustration was undeniable, while Crockett sat back with the quiet confidence of someone who knew she had just created a moment that would echo far beyond that night. What began as an explosive rant ended as a defining viral exchange. Maddow's outburst became background noise, overshadowed by Crockett's composure and unforgettable one-liner. The headlines the next day confirmed it. Crockett didn't just survive the confrontation, she owned it. The clip of Crockett's line had barely finished airing when Twitter exploded. Viewers cut and reposted the moment within seconds, captioning it with phrases like, "She ended Maddow in one sentence," and "This is how you deal with arrogance on live TV." On TikTok, creators stitched the clip with their reactions, mouths wide open, hands over faces, stunned by how effortlessly Crockett flipped the entire exchange. Political commentators on both sides of the spectrum admitted, grudgingly or not, that Crockett's calm dismantling was the highlight of the night. Meanwhile, Maddow's team scrambled to control the fallout. In the control room, producers whispered frantically into headsets, urging Maddow to regain her composure. But the damage had been done. The more she tried to force her narrative, the more it looked like she was struggling to keep up with Crockett's unshakable command of facts. Crockett, however, seemed to know exactly what was happening outside the studio walls. She adjusted her posture, smiled, and added, "The truth doesn't need a microphone, it just needs a moment to breathe." That line became the second wave of viral posts, further cementing her position as the unshaken winner of the exchange. By the end of the night, hashtags like #CrockettClapback and #MadowMeltdown were trending worldwide. Major outlets were already preparing think pieces on the moment, and Crockett supporters flooded her with praise. What Maddow thought would be her shining takedown instead became the viral undoing of her argument, and the internet crowned Crockett as the clear victor. By the following morning, the political world was buzzing. Clips of the clash had been replayed on every major news program, with analysts dissecting every word. Some tried to defend Maddow, claiming she was simply passionate, but others admitted it looked like she had lost control while Crockett stood unshaken. On Capitol Hill, whispers spread quickly. Staffers sent the clip around in group chats, and even rivals quietly admitted Crockett had just elevated her national profile. "That's how you handle a meltdown," one senator was overheard telling a colleague in the hall. Social media only amplified the moment. Political podcasts recorded emergency episodes just to discuss the exchange. One commentator quipped, "Rachel Maddow invited Jasmine Crockett on for a fight, but forgot that Crockett doesn't swing wild, she swings precise." The line went viral on its own, attached to memes of Maddow shouting and Crockett calmly holding up documents. Behind the scenes, MSNBC executives weren't pleased. The network had intended for Maddow to steer the conversation, not become the story herself. Now, instead of Crockett being on the defensive, it was Maddow whose credibility was being questioned. Crockett, however, didn't fan the flames. In an interview later that day, she kept her tone measured. "I don't go on television to win arguments. I go to tell the truth. If people see that as a clapback, it's because the truth has a way of standing on its own." That statement only added fuel to her rising reputation, calm, unbothered, and unwilling to play into the chaos. What started as a clash on one network had turned into a nationwide conversation, and it was becoming clear, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a guest that night, she was the moment. Inside the MSNBC studio, the tension was thick as the segment wrapped. Producers tried to carry on as if nothing unusual had happened, but the energy in the control room was undeniable. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others smirked quietly, aware they had just witnessed a viral moment that no amount of spin could erase. When the cameras cut to commercial, Maddow ripped off her earpiece and leaned back, visibly frustrated. She muttered about the unfairness of how Crockett had dominated the exchange, but her staff offered only cautious nods. No one wanted to be the one to tell her that Crockett's composure had been flawless. Meanwhile, Crockett sat calmly at the guest table, unbothered. She picked up her phone, already buzzing with notifications. Messages poured in from colleagues, supporters, and even political opponents, some congratulating her, others warning her that she had just made powerful enemies. Crockett only smiled. She knew that in politics, moments like this didn't come often, and she had seized it. One staffer whispered to another, "This is going to be all over tomorrow. Maddow looks like she lost control, and Crockett? She looks untouchable." Back in the green room, as Crockett prepared to leave, a younger MSNBC journalist approached her quietly. "That was incredible," they said with admiration. Crockett thanked them with the same grace she'd shown on air. She didn't need to gloat, the clips circulating online were doing that for her. By the time Maddow returned to finish the show, she looked rattled. Her tone was more restrained, her usual confidence shaken. And for viewers at home, the contrast was unmistakable. Rachel Maddow, usually the one driving the narrative, had been left scrambling, while Jasmine Crockett exited the building looking stronger than ever. The next morning, rival networks wasted no time capitalizing on the meltdown. Clips of Maddow shouting, paired with Crockett's cool responses, dominated the opening monologues. Conservative hosts gleefully replayed the exchange, laughing at how the Queen of Control had been undone on her own stage. Even neutral anchors shook their heads, calling it a rare moment where the guest clearly outshined the host. On social media, pundits framed it as a battle of styles. Maddow's fiery approach versus Crockett's steady hand. But the public seemed to have made up its mind. Crockett's one-liners were being stitched into trending sounds on TikTok, while Maddow's raised voice had already been remixed into memes. Morning talk shows debated whether Maddow had gone too far. One panelist bluntly stated, "Rachel wasn't interviewing, she was exploding." And Crockett handled it like a chess master facing someone flipping the board. That remark quickly spread as a quote card across Instagram. MSNBC's competitors used the fiasco as proof of their own credibility. CNN ran a segment titled, "When Interviews Go Wrong," and used Maddow's clash as the prime example. Fox News declared, "Crockett schools Maddow in her own studio." Even late-night comedians jumped in, joking about Maddow needing a timeout while Crockett wrote the punchline. Through it all, Crockett remained composed. When asked for comment, she simply said, "I'll let the public decide who handled themselves best." That refusal to gloat only elevated her further, painting her as the adult in the room while Maddow struggled with the fallout. By the end of the week, it wasn't just a trending moment, it was being called a career-defining one. And while Maddow's team scrambled to shift focus, Crockett supporters knew the truth: this was only the beginning of her rise. In Washington, the impact of the viral exchange rippled quickly through the halls of Congress. Lawmakers who had barely paid attention to the interview found themselves stopping in corridors, scrolling through their phones, replaying Crockett's calm dismantling of Maddow's fury. Supporters in Crockett's party praised her behind closed doors. "She just proved she can take the fire and still come out ahead," one senior congresswoman told reporters off the record. "That's a rare skill, and the whole country just saw it." Even political rivals couldn't help but comment. A senator from the opposing side remarked on a morning show, "Look, I don't often agree with her, but she handled herself better than most politicians I've seen under that kind of pressure." The clip of that statement, coming from someone who usually dismissed her, added another layer of credibility to Crockett's growing reputation. Meanwhile, Maddow's meltdown became the subject of jokes in political circles. Staffers whispered about how Maddow lost it on her own show, while Crockett's team noticed a surge in invitations for her to appear on other major programs. Suddenly, she wasn't just a guest, she was a sought-after voice. In committee meetings that week, colleagues gave her subtle nods of respect. Some who had once dismissed her as too bold now saw her as a formidable figure. The confrontation had not only boosted her visibility but also shifted how she was perceived on Capitol Hill. As Crockett walked through the halls, she carried herself with the same composure she had shown on camera. She didn't need to mention Maddow or the exchange, everyone already knew. And with each passing day, it became clearer, this wasn't just a viral moment, it was a turning point in her political trajectory. Jasmine Crockett's team quickly recognized the momentum building around her. What began as a tense TV exchange was turning into a political branding opportunity, and they moved swiftly to capitalize. Her communications director drafted a simple strategy: don't chase the moment, let it come to her. Instead of jumping on every talk show request, Crockett chose selectively. She appeared on one morning program, where the host asked if she felt proud of the clapback heard around the country. Crockett simply smiled and said, "I don't celebrate arguments. I celebrate clarity. If people found clarity in my words, then I did my job." That calm, measured answer struck exactly the right tone, firm, but never boastful. Her campaign team clipped that response and shared it widely, framing her as a leader who wouldn't be baited into drama. Within hours, it was trending alongside the original viral clip. Supporters began flooding her social media with encouragement, calling her unshakable, grace under fire, and the kind of politician we need right now. Behind the scenes, fundraisers noticed the surge too. Donations ticked upward as grassroots supporters attached notes like, "That Maddow interview sealed my support for you." Crockett's ability to stay calm under pressure wasn't just winning her viral points, it was translating into tangible political strength. Meanwhile, Maddow's silence only fueled the narrative. The more she avoided addressing the clash, the more it looked like she had been bested. Other networks poked fun at her absence, saying, "When your outburst makes someone else the star, sometimes the best move is to stay quiet." By the week's end, Crockett wasn't just a trending name, she was being talked about as a rising national figure, someone who had turned a hostile stage into her platform. Within days, polls began to reflect the ripple effect of Crockett's viral moment. In districts far outside her own, voters who barely knew her name suddenly recognized her face and associated it with strength under fire. Political analysts noted that her approval ratings had quietly ticked upward, a rare feat in such a polarized climate. One national survey found that viewers described her as confident, disciplined, and refreshingly authentic. Those words contrasted sharply with Maddow's ratings, which dipped slightly as critics accused her of losing control on air. Grassroots supporters began organizing under new hashtags like #StandWithCrockett and #ClarityNotChaos. What was striking wasn't just the support from her base, it was the crossover appeal. Independent voters who usually ignored cable news drama admitted they admired how she handled herself. At town halls back home, constituents brought up the interview over and over again. "We watched you take all that shouting and still keep your cool," one woman told her, drawing applause from the crowd. Another supporter added, "That's the kind of composure we want representing us." Crockett listened graciously but kept her answers grounded, never overstating the moment. Meanwhile, editorial boards started publishing opinion pieces with headlines like, "The Night Jasmine Crockett Went National," and "Why Calm Beat Chaos on MSNBC." For many, the interview became more than just a clash between a host and a guest, it was seen as a demonstration of how leadership looks in real time. Crockett hadn't asked for the spotlight, but now it was shining directly on her. And for the first time, strategists across both parties began to whisper, this wasn't just a viral clip anymore, it might be the start of something much bigger. Behind the polished statements and viral clips, a quieter but far more significant shift was taking place. Political donors, many of whom had previously overlooked Jasmine Crockett, were suddenly paying attention. Calls began pouring into her office from influential figures who wanted to connect, discuss opportunities, or simply show support. At a private dinner in Washington, one veteran strategist leaned across the table and told her bluntly, "You've got what most politicians chase for years, a national moment. Don't waste it." Crockett nodded, listening carefully, but she didn't rush into promises. She knew momentum was valuable, but she also knew it could vanish if handled recklessly. Several high-profile donors quietly shifted their contributions, sending checks her way. Grassroots donations continued to flood in as well, but now they were being joined by more powerful backers. Crockett's campaign manager, reviewing the surge, whispered, "This changes everything." Her colleagues in Congress also began to circle closer. Those who once dismissed her as too outspoken now saw her as someone with undeniable political gravity. Even seasoned lawmakers invited her into discussions they hadn't before, recognizing the clout she now carried. Meanwhile, Maddow's silence dragged on. Without a direct response, the perception stuck, Rachel had lost control, and Crockett had walked away stronger. The imbalance between them grew with each passing day, as Crockett's name appeared in more headlines while Maddow's meltdown was mentioned only as the spark that lit the fire. For Crockett, the moment wasn't just a victory, it was a gateway. Allies saw her not as a rising star anymore, but as someone who could one day hold national leadership. And though she remained humble in her public statements, privately, her team began to ask the question no one had dared before, are we looking at the beginning of a future presidential run? As Jasmine Crockett's influence swelled, the media landscape shifted into overdrive. Some outlets framed her as the fresh, unshakable voice in politics, while others scrambled to paint her as lucky, hoping to minimize the power of her moment. Panel discussions buzzed with speculation, was Crockett's rise a flash in the pan, or the start of something unstoppable? Her political opponents weren't blind to the change. Behind closed doors, strategists convened to discuss how to slow her momentum. Opposition research teams were suddenly tasked with digging deeper into her record, looking for anything that could dull the shine of her viral success. If she can do that to Maddow on live TV, one consultant warned, imagine what she could do in a debate. But Crockett's allies had their own strategy. They saw the opening to amplify her calm, fact-driven image even further. Rather than overexposing her, they carefully curated her appearances, ensuring every stage she stepped onto felt intentional. The more her rivals tried to attack, the more measured she appeared in response, making the contrast even sharper. Meanwhile, news magazines began putting her face on their covers with headlines like, "The Politician Who Kept Her Cool," and "Jasmine Crockett, the Viral Voice of a New Generation." Even late-night comedians, who had once barely mentioned her, started including her in their monologues, often casting her as the foil to Maddow's meltdown. Maddow, for her part, seemed caught in a dilemma. If she addressed the viral clash, it would only bring more attention to Crockett. If she stayed silent, the story lingered anyway. Either way, the narrative had slipped out of her control, and into Crockett's. In the halls of power, one thing became clear: the confrontation hadn't just been television drama. It had redrawn lines in the political landscape. And everyone, from journalists to donors to rivals, was now adjusting their strategies with Jasmine Crockett in mind. The attacks began almost immediately. Opponents who had ignored Jasmine Crockett before now saw her as a real threat, and they launched a coordinated effort to tear her down. Opinion pieces popped up accusing her of being too theatrical, while pundits on rival networks insisted her viral moment was nothing more than a lucky one-liner. One senator even took to the Senate floor, indirectly referencing Crockett by saying, "Some people mistake performance for leadership. But shouting matches on TV don't make you qualified to lead." The irony, of course, was not lost on observers. Crockett hadn't shouted at all. The line fell flat, and clips of it were quickly compared to her calm responses during Maddow's meltdown. Crockett refused to engage in the mudslinging. When asked by a reporter if she wanted to respond to her critics, she simply smiled and said, "I don't measure my work by headlines. I measure it by results. My district knows that, and that's what matters to me." That simple reply earned her even more respect, reinforcing the image that she wasn't just a politician chasing viral fame, she was grounded in her purpose. But the most striking moment came during a live radio interview. A caller accused her of grandstanding on television. Crockett paused, then answered, "Grandstanding is when you make noise without substance. I didn't raise my voice, I raised the facts. If that looks like grandstanding to you, maybe it says more about how little we expect from our leaders." The host went silent, then muttered, "Well, that's hard to argue with." That clip, like so many before, spread across social media within hours. Her opponents tried to paint her as unqualified, but every attempt seemed to backfire, making her look even more composed, even more credible. The very attacks meant to weaken her were sharpening her public image instead. It was becoming clearer by the day, every confrontation only made Jasmine Crockett stronger. What had started as a fiery moment on American television soon spilled beyond national borders. International outlets picked up the story, replaying the clash between Rachel Maddow and Jasmine Crockett with subtitles in multiple languages. Headlines in Europe described it as the interview that shook U.S. politics, while a popular British paper ran the headline, "Calm Congresswoman Silences TV Host in Viral Showdown." In Canada, commentators praised Crockett's composure, contrasting it with what they called the noise of American political media. In Germany, political analysts on a late-night panel dissected her lines word for word, calling them a masterclass in rhetoric under pressure. Even in Asia, clips of Crockett's Clapback circulated widely on social media platforms, where audiences admired her ability to remain unshaken. Diplomats quietly noted the attention too. Foreign officials who had barely known her name before now saw her as a politician with poise, someone who might have a role in shaping America's future image abroad. One European ambassador even joked during a reception, "If she can keep her cool with Maddow, I'd trust her at any negotiation table." The viral spread also meant Crockett's words were being translated, quoted, and debated across cultures. What impressed people most wasn't just her facts, but her restraint, her ability to cut through chaos with calm authority. In an age of shouting matches and political theatrics, that quality resonated universally. Rachel Maddow's meltdown had unintentionally given Crockett a global stage. And as more international outlets spotlighted her, the image of Jasmine Crockett as a steady, formidable figure only grew stronger. What was once a single TV segment had now turned into a worldwide showcase of character and control. The flood of international attention didn't just elevate Jasmine Crockett's image, it began reshaping the way people talked about her future. In Washington, whispers grew louder. Strategists speculated that she wasn't just a rising star anymore, but someone with the potential to climb far higher on the national stage. Her inner circle noticed the shift immediately. Invitations started arriving for keynote speeches at high-profile conferences, not just in the US but abroad. One think tank in London extended an invitation for her to address a global summit on leadership, citing her ability to command respect under pressure. For a congresswoman still early in her national career, that kind of offer was unheard of. Back home, supporters began urging her to consider larger ambitions. At rallies, signs reading, "Crockett for the Future," appeared, crafted by volunteers who saw her as more than just a strong voice in Congress. Pollsters noticed that when respondents were asked about potential national leaders of tomorrow, her name started to surface alongside figures who had been in the game much longer. Her team treaded carefully. They knew chasing the hype could backfire, but they also knew the window of opportunity was real. In closed-door strategy sessions, aides debated the next steps. Should she lean into the spotlight or stay disciplined and let the buzz build naturally? Crockett herself remained grounded. When asked directly if she was thinking about higher office, she answered with a smile, "I'm focused on doing my job well today. The future will take care of itself." That humility only fueled more speculation. Commentators noted that it was the kind of answer people expect from leaders who know their time is coming. And as international outlets continued to profile her, one thing became undeniable: her ambitions, whether spoken or not, were now a matter of public debate. What began as a single TV clash had transformed into something larger, a launchpad for Jasmine Crockett's political future. For weeks, Rachel Maddow had remained silent, hoping the viral storm would fade. But the silence only made things worse. Crockett's calm composure became the story, while Maddow's outburst lingered like an unanswered question. Finally, under pressure from both critics and her own network, Maddow decided to address the clash publicly. She opened her show one evening with a monologue meant to reframe the moment. "Passion," she declared, "should never be mistaken for losing control. I was passionate, because the stakes are high." She attempted to pivot by painting Crockett's answers as evasive, suggesting the congresswoman had dodged tough questions with rehearsed soundbites. But the timing backfired. Social media instantly replayed Maddow's rant next to Crockett's calm, fact-filled answers. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Viewers didn't see passion, they saw imbalance. Hashtags like #StillShouting and #CrockettCool surged again, pushing Maddow's defense into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Political commentators wasted no time weighing in. One analyst remarked on live TV, "The more Maddow tries to explain it, the worse it looks. Crockett doesn't even need to respond, silence is her victory lap." Another quipped, "Rachel brought gasoline to a fire she couldn't put out." Meanwhile, Crockett remained steady. When reporters asked her about Maddow's comments, she smiled and simply said, "I think people saw what they saw. I don't need to add more." That single sentence, delivered with grace, was replayed almost as much as Maddow's attempted defense. For Maddow, her statement was meant to reclaim control. Instead, it reignited the very narrative she wanted to bury. For Crockett, doing nothing at all once again proved more powerful than any fiery rebuttal. The message was clear: the more Maddow fought, the more Crockett's quiet strength overshadowed her. The storm Maddow had tried to contain finally swallowed her. Despite her attempts to spin the confrontation, the public had made its judgment weeks earlier. Crockett's steady composure became the defining image, while Maddow's outburst lived on in endless clips, memes, and late-night punchlines. At MSNBC, whispers grew that producers regretted booking Crockett in the first place, not because she had failed, but because she had eclipsed their star. Ratings for Maddow's next shows dipped slightly as viewers tuned in less for her analysis, and more for clips of Crockett circulating online. The contrast couldn't have been sharper: one career moment looked like decline, the other like ascension. For Jasmine Crockett, the outcome was transformative. Invitations poured in from universities, civic groups, and international forums asking her to speak. Her fundraising totals shattered records, fueled by small-dollar donations from people who had never before contributed to politics. Even her colleagues in Congress began treating her differently, with senior members openly praising her ability to handle pressure. What struck observers most was that Crockett never boasted about the moment. She never gloated, never replayed the clip herself. She simply carried on with her work, her quiet confidence speaking louder than Maddow's raised voice ever could. That restraint turned her into more than a viral sensation, it turned her into a symbol of leadership. In the end, Maddow's explosion was just a spark. Crockett's response was the fire that followed, reshaping her image not just as a sharp debater, but as someone destined for a larger stage. Commentators summed it up best in the weeks that followed. Rachel Maddow lost her temper. Jasmine Crockett gained her moment. And that moment may have changed the trajectory of her entire career. The clash was over, but its echoes remained. One woman's meltdown had become another woman's rise.